We just got through week 12 fantasy football, and not only do we have another week closer to the fantasy football playoffs now, and not only do we have a lot more information about running backs in fantasy football this year, but we also have to acknowledge that there is a slight difference in the way we need to be thinking about fantasy football running backs in the playoffs. Running backs this year, they're wildly unpredictable past Christian McCaffrey. So today we need to go through the top 30 running back rankings for the fantasy football playoffs, guys. And I am doing my best over here to make you guys as prepared as possible for the fantasy football playoffs. So please go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Let's go ahead and just get right into these rankings right now. So I said it in the intro, the only guy you know you can count on 100% is Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey is not only the highest upside running back with the highest ceiling in fantasy football, he's also the only one who's truly reliable. Hits his floor consistently at 15 to 16 points. And if he doesn't hit that floor, the guy's getting you 25 to 30 to 40 points. Christian McCaffrey remains ultra consistent and just ultra important in fantasy football. And like I said, we go down to 2, and I am taking shots based on a number of factors here. I'm taking shots based on schedules. I'm taking shots based on performances from what we've seen. And David Montgomery, to me, is the second best running back for the fantasy football playoffs. Let's break this one down. You can see it on the screen. Their schedule is not exactly perfect, but it has some favorable matchups in there. Now, what you also see on the screen is when it comes to his numbers, when he has been out there, he's averaging you massive fantasy production. Over 16 fantasy points per game. The guy has been injured twice now this season. Now, I don't want to bank on an injury in the fantasy football playoffs. We're doing these rankings, and a lot of things go into there. Injuries are not one of them for most of these guys, unless they are already injured. Dave Montgomery's healthy right now, and that's just simply what we have to bank on because he's behind a top 3 offensive line. And even though last week wasn't a great performance as I am filming this after week 12, which was Thanksgiving week, Dave Montgomery to me has shown the most consistency with the highest upside out of any other running back in this tier. Because at 3 and 4, honestly, you could rank these guys however you want to. Kyren Williams and Jonathan Taylor are back-to-back at 3 and 4 for me. Jonathan Taylor, I really wanted to go with him at number 3. But simply put, Kyren Williams, in his return to action from being on the IR for the Los Angeles Rams, was phenomenal. It was absolutely outrageous what he was able to do. Now, I want to, we need to acknowledge something here. At this point in the season, so many things matter. Like every matchup, every position, every decision you make, every fantasy point down to the decimal matters right now. So a lot of people are going to overreact on Kyren Williams, or so think they will overreact. I don't think this is an overreaction. I think he's truly elite in fantasy football because the Rams now are fully in position to battle it out for the wild card spot. They will do that, so they won't take their foot off the gas, and that's a concern I had with this team earlier in this season. But Jonathan Taylor, like I said, you can very well rank him at number 3 in my opinion. Jonathan Taylor has shown the same performance level as Kyren Williams. I mean, look at the numbers on the screen. He's not averaging the same fantasy points per game, but his efficiency is basically right there with him. Jonathan Taylor has been tremendous in fantasy football since basically over the past month and a half. The only issue I have is that Zach Moss did get a couple more touches again in week 12. How long does it last? I don't know, and I don't really care because Jonathan Taylor, even with Zach Moss's touches, just had a 2 touchdown performance, and his schedule, as you can see on the screen, it's not exactly a daunting one, to put it lightly there. At number 5 here, I've got Travis Etienne. Travis Etienne, to me, is not only have I been big on him for the duration of the season, dating back to the offseason, I was big on Travis Etienne. Travis Etienne, to me, is a great buy low candidate still if you have not reached your trade deadline. Travis Etienne's schedule, as you can see on the screen, it's got favorable matchups in there. And Travis Etienne is still involved in this offense. Now, The past several weeks have not been great for him. Nobody's going to suggest that they were, right? That's just not the reality here. Travis Etienne to me, I'm banking on what we've seen from him, and the fact that Jacksonville is 100% fighting for the #1 seed, they're going to continue to use Travis Etienne very much. I've got Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs back-to-back at 6 and 7. The two rookie running backs I think are pulling through at the right time. One of them in particular is pulling through perfectly in time for the fantasy football playoffs, and it's Bijan Robinson. Now, before week 12 fantasy football, I was discussing Bijan Robinson and how much I was just getting higher and higher on him throughout the week. And the reason is because, like, the numbers on the screen speak for themselves. Efficient, this guy can score, like, he's a great player in this league. You didn't need me to tell you that. You know what I mean? I'll tell you who needed me to tell them that. It was the Atlanta Falcons coaching staff. Because finally, they're on board with giving him 20+ touches per game. Before week 12 fantasy football, I read that they were planning to give him a significant workload, and that's exactly what they did. Bijan Robinson to me is peaking at the perfect time for your fantasy football playoffs, and I hope that you bought him low when I advised so, because his schedule is really, really great. And Jahmyr Gibbs, I feel very similar to in a lot of ways. The only thing I worry about with Jahmyr Gibbs is that if Jahmyr Gibbs is not getting as much rushing upside, he's going to get targets, which is good, but David Montgomery is going to be able to hog a lot of the red zone work because that's exactly what has happened this year when both of them have been healthy. So that's why you saw, even with basically the same amount of touches in week 12 on Thanksgiving Day for both David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, that's why you saw David Montgomery have a better fantasy game, because he was getting red zone work, and that's exactly when he got in the end zone that week. That's the problem here for Jahmyr Gibbs, but nonetheless, extremely explosive back, high producer, efficient running back, running behind the top 3 offensive line. At number 8 here, DeAndre Swift is one spot ahead of Josh Jacobs at number 9. I know for a fact I'm going to get pushback on this, so let me explain. DeAndre Swift, I mentioned him as a buy low trade target before week 13 fantasy football. Now, the reason I did that is because you can see his numbers on the screen. Efficiency, running behind the best offensive line in football. You can also see on the screen the playoff schedule, which is not, it has favorable matchups on it. What I compare him to Josh Jacobs, when you compare these two, looking at the numbers, Josh Jacobs is beating him in the volume per game. There's no question about that. And I'm not going to say that DeAndre Swift is all of a sudden going to become this 20-touch guy. I'm not saying that. But you can see the efficiency numbers here. Josh Jacobs, you take out that big run he had in week 12, and he's averaging barely 3 yards per carry. Now, you can't take out the big plays when it comes to Josh Jacobs. I'm fully on board with that notion because he's capable of the big plays. That's why he's still a top 10 running back. But the schedule that he has compared to Philadelphia's schedule, you can see that schedule on the screen. He's got to play Kansas City again, which in Kansas City, probably going to be a much different outcome here. I think that DeAndre Swift, the matchups and just the team and their upside is just better than Josh Jacobs. But again, Josh Jacobs still inside the top 10 for a very good reason. Isaiah Pacheco at number 10. Isaiah Pacheco is someone that I've been big on for all year. I've been saying for a lot of the season, actually, trade low for Isaiah Pacheco. This guy has a lot of upside in fantasy football. And I remember after the Philadelphia game in week 11, I had a lot of people who were questioning whether they should sell him off for, Rachaad White or Javonte Williams. And I said, no, hold on to Isaiah Pacheco. And the reason became clear after week 12. The guy had 20+ touches again, and he scored 2 touchdowns because he's the number 2 option on one of the best offenses in football. That's why you go into your playoffs prepared to use Isaiah Pacheco as the running back 10 in the fantasy football playoffs. Man, I've got Raheem Mostert and Austin Eckler here at 11 and 12. And it's going to sound really low and really shocking. And I don't blame you if you're upset about this. Like, Raheem Mostert right now is the running back 2 in fantasy football. The guy has been outrageously good. Austin Eckler has been a fantasy stud for years, and Austin Eckler's schedule, it's not exactly awful. Raheem Mostert's schedule is awful. And that's my fear about it, is that Raheem Mostert in tough matchups, not even just Raheem Mostert, the Dolphins as a team, they struggle in tougher matchups against tough defenses that can beat the you-know-what out of you. That's been his problem, and he's got 3 of them in that fantasy playoff stretch. I worry about him. Austin Eckler, I worry about him simply because this guy is not efficient right now. The age looks like it's catching up to him. Now, he's not losing targets. That's not my problem here. He's seeing targets still. But this guy has not been efficient with his work, and it's always been like this for Austin Eckler. Unless he gets in the end zone, his fantasy output is not pedestrian, but slightly above average. That's what we're seeing now, because he's not getting in the end zone as frequently. So you're seeing these issues with Austin Eckler pop up, and that's what has me lower on him and Raheem Mostert for the fantasy football playoffs. Alvin Kamara, 1 spot above Rachaad White. Alvin Kamara is going through some stuff. That's the best way I can say it. He's going through a lot of stuff right now. And I've been reading comments from him in the media, and it's like, he looks pretty unhappy in New Orleans. That's not a good thing, for obviously because of just, what the effort will look like in the fantasy playoffs, but also from the fact of, like, the Saints offense looks like just a train wreck right now. With all that talent they've got, they look just totally out of sorts. They look unprepared. It's embarrassing, actually. And I'm not even a Saints fan. I want to watch good football, and this team is not very good right now at all. They're headed for if they're in the playoffs, they're a one-way ticket out. Alvin Kamara, to me, is still top 15 simply because of the workload that he continues to get. And we know he can hit big plays. And Rachaad White right behind him. At this point, we just have to accept reality with this guy. Rachaad White is never had an issue with his workload. That's never been the problem. The problem is the efficiency, and it still is the problem. You can see the numbers on the screen. They're not fooling anybody. But when this guy gets a good matchup and he's got opportunities to get in the red zone, he's giving you a big week. He's got boom or bust potential to him. I don't prefer him over guys like Eckler or Kamara still because of the fact that I know what these guys can do. And I know that they're on more competitive teams slightly than Rachaad White, and Alvin Kamara is more efficient than Rachaad White. But that is not to say that Rachaad White is some bad option. I think Rachaad White is fully planted in the top 15 for the fantasy football playoffs. Brian Robinson is 1 spot above Kenneth Walker at 15 and 16. Brian Robinson, I know it's probably still going to sound low to people, but like, I've been super low on Brian Robinson all year long. And I finally just had to look at it, ironically, after the Week 12 Thanksgiving game against Dallas, and I was like, this guy is just such a boom or bust player, and there's nothing consistent about him. Like, the workload's not consistent. Some weeks he'll see 7 targets, some weeks he'll see nothing. Some weeks he'll see 20 carries, some weeks he'll see 6. There's nothing consistent about his workload. That's what the problem I have is with him. And he's relatively efficient, but it's not that efficient. And touchdowns are so hard to come by for him. But when they do come, they pop off. The only reason I consider him a better option in the playoffs above Kenneth Walker is because of the fact that Kenneth Walker's injured right now, and it's hard to tell what his situation is going to be. Now, his playoff schedule, it's not as tough as people think. Like, you could look at it on the screen, and there's a lot of matchups in there with defense that are not exactly playing the best football right now. So I don't worry about the matchups. What I worry about with Kenneth Walker is the injury concerns, and that's exactly why he's down here at 16. Derrick Henry at 17. Derrick Henry, I said it before Week 12, if he can't capitalize against the Carolina Panthers, I'm done with him. He's a waste in my book after that. Now, he came in and he produced 2 touchdowns, actually had a good game in fantasy. I was like, all right, good sign here for sure. The problem is he doesn't get to play the Carolina Panthers every single week. That's the problem here. And a lot of the matchups that he's had, he's been a problem. Now he's playing the Texans twice in the playoffs. And the Texans have been a lot better against the run than years past. They just played really good against Travis Etienne. So Derrick Henry, to me, in the playoffs, you must remember these are playoff rankings. And Derrick Henry in the playoffs, I think, is going to be worn down by then. And I don't like his matchups. James Cook above Jerome Ford at 18 and 19. James Cook and Jerome Ford are relatively in similar circumstances. Not from a workload standpoint necessarily, because James Cook does not get the full amount of workload that Jerome Ford has, at least for the season. But I discussed James Cook on my buy low trade target video before week 13. And what I said about James Cook was that when you look at his workload with Ken Dorsey, the offensive coordinator former, before they fired him, it was so inconsistent. Anywhere from 20 touches one time while he was there to like 6 touches. It was gross. Similar to Brian Robinson, actually, except he wasn't getting in the end zone. Without Ken Dorsey, 2 times straight now, he has had 20-plus opportunities. That could be here to stay. And if that is the case, I want this guy because he's efficient. Jerome Ford is also pretty efficient as well, and he gets more work. The only problem that I have with Cleveland is that how much do they become one-dimensional in this offense with Dorian Thompson-Robinson? And also, what is the upside that he has with Kareem Hunt still there? Now, you can make the argument James Cook has Josh Allen taken running away from him. That's 100% correct. But Jerome Ford gets a lot of touches stolen from him at the goal line, and they're very interchangeable to me, but I prefer James Cook because, like I said, I think that his workload is actually going to be more consistent in the playoffs. And if that's the case, the efficiency that he has, give me that efficient player with that kind of workload. I've got Saquon Barkley here behind those guys, and Javonte Williams one spot behind him at 21. Saquon Barkley, I've said it's not surprising to me what's happening right now. I've said this over the weeks with him, and it's that Saquon Barkley is the team's entire offense. So when he doesn't go, they don't go. They barely beat the Patriots the other day because the Patriots stink, and also because Saquon Barkley was not a factor. The Patriots took him out of the game, as they tend to do. Saquon Barkley always is going to have this problem, and his schedule in the playoffs is not exactly ideal. So that's the problem here with Saquon. The reason I would take him over Javonte is because Javonte honestly has a very similar workload at this point. He's getting basically 20-plus opportunities over the past month. That's a good thing. The problem I have with Javonte compared to Saquon is that Saquon has shown more efficiency with his work than Javonte has. Javonte's going to get opportunities, and he's on a better offense as a whole. I like that, but I don't like the fact that he hasn't shown the efficiency and the capability of getting in the end zone as frequently as Saquon has. I've got Breece Hall, one spot above Tony Pollard here at 22 and 23. Now, they're very similar to me in a lot of ways, not because of their offensive line. Dallas's offensive line, way better than the Jets. Not because of their offense. Dallas's offense, 1,000 light years better than the Jets' offense. The reason that I like Breece Hall more is because he's just simply better at big plays than Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard has gotten into the end zone 2 straight weeks now as of the time of this filming after week 12. But Tony Pollard has shown so much more inconsistency, so much more inefficiency, and so much less of an ability to get into the end zone than Breece Hall. So yes, Breece Hall's offense sucks. It totally sucks. But Breece Hall, his upside remains because he's a big play threat and he consistently sees targets. So if there's a world, even if it's just a world light years away, that Aaron Rodgers returns for the playoffs, Breece Hall is a good fantasy option, a high-end upside play in the playoffs. Don't count on it. That's why he's down at 22. But I think that if the possibility is there, I would take him above Tony Pollard. Devon Achane at 24. Kind of the odd man out. The fish out of water in these rankings, I feel, personally, is Devon Achane. There's a lot of reasons for it. Devon Achane, I've discussed him over the past couple of weeks. he's a player that, when given the opportunity, has been outrageously phenomenal in fantasy football. Those numbers on the screen don't lie. He's been it's been outrageous. Now, the problem is that it's only been like a 3-game sample size. And the other problem is that he's hurt right now. And he re-injured the same knee that kept him out for 4 games. So, how likely is it that he's going to return? Again, filming this after week 12. He didn't play against the Jets in week 12 on Black Friday. When does he play again, if at all? He's considered day-to-day as the time of this filming. But at the end of the day, like, if you've got this kind of upside, you've got to be inside the top 30. But I can't put you much higher than this, especially with the tough schedule I discussed with Raheem Mostert and the fact that nobody's got an answer of when you're coming back. That's why he's at 24. A spot above Gus Edwards and 2 above Ramondre Stevenson. Gus Edwards is, like, when it comes to a player who's healthy, he is healthy right now. But when it comes to a player that has a not only relatively inconsistent workload, but just a low workload on his best day, yeah, Gus Edwards is that. And Gus Edwards was a guy that I got excited about before week 12, and it didn't pan out. Why? Because this Ravens team isn't married to Gus Edwards. They're not married to his workload. They can give the ball to Keaton Mitchell. They can give the ball to Justice Hill. Lamar Jackson can just run it. That's what you see. And that's the problem here, while acknowledging the upside is there because he gets a lot of red zone opportunities and he is a touchdown threat. Now, Ramondre Stevenson has had several good performances in a row. That's 3 now. 3, 8, 16 plus fantasy point performances based on your format. It's good. The Patriots are just such a untrustable team from any fantasy football asset they have. That's why I just can't find it in me to tell my audience, yes, play Ramondre and trade for him right now because he's going to be a great option. As I said in the intro, playing in the fantasy football playoffs, you approach games largely the same way, but you also do have to make changes. And when you're talking about a guy who's been largely low ceiling this year, just because he's on a good run, this guy could easily give you a 6-point game and crush your chances. You could get that from Breece Hall. You can get it from Raheem Mostert as well. But at least we know with those guys, they've got massive ceilings that exceed what Ramondre Stevenson has showed us. Joe Mixon and James Conner at 27 and 28. Joe Mixon is, I discussed this for weeks about Joe Mixon. His upside was higher, and it was continuing to get higher because of Joe Burrow's presence. Joe Burrow was opening the thing up for him. Now without Joe Burrow, it's not the same, and you saw it if you watched the game versus the Steelers in Week 12. This offense just does not have the upside they once had with Joe Burrow. It's just not there. That's my problem. And his schedule, you can see it on the screen, not an easy one. Joe Mixon, I've got a lot of issues with. And James Conner, I've got tons of issues with him too. I was starting to kind of grow on him. And for years and years, I've been against James Conner in fantasy. I can't seem to figure the guy out. I can't. I'll be honest with you guys. This guy is on a terrible team. They're done. And I think that they're just going to continue to get beaten. And James Conner's going to have game scripts like he just saw against the Rams where they won't give him any opportunities to run the ball because they're down by so much. To round it out, I've got the 2 Steelers running backs, Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris. You can rank Najee above Jaylen if you want to. They're in the same tier for a reason. I still prefer Jaylen Warren, and I actually had a question about this one after the Steelers game versus the Bengals. First game without Matt Canada. Had a question about this one. Said, should we get Najee Harris now that we've seen what it's going to be like without Matt Canada? Well, I just want to say 2 things. Number one, the first game back without Matt Canada, not a surprise that they came out and they were showing a lot more life offensively because they wanted to convince themselves, and I think they're right, that Matt Canada was holding them back. It doesn't mean that they're going to consistently do this. This is not the Steelers' new offense. I'd be shocked if it was. And number 2, they're still, Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren are still sharing the workload. Nobody's got a leg up over the other. So Jalen Warren will do it next week. Najee will do it the next week. That's how it goes in Pittsburgh right now. So they're both worthy of being in the top 30. You can rank them how you want to, but the bottom line is there is hope for the Steelers running game. So let me know what you think of the rankings in the comments below and what questions you need answered before your fantasy football playoffs. And if you want to see the top 30 wide receiver rankings for the fantasy football playoffs, click on this video right here.